Welcome to the Low Production, High Value Show with your host, Andrew Jenkins. On the show, we'll be exploring the world of entrepreneurship, social media, and the growing digital landscape. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur or just starting out, you know that the world of business is constantly evolving and changing. And in today's digital age, it is more important than ever to understand how social media and technology are affecting the way we do business. That's why on this show, we'll be talking to entrepreneurs and experts who have a wealth of knowledge and experience to share with you. From the latest trends and technologies to the struggles and triumphs of running a business, we'll be covering it all. So if you're looking to level up your entrepreneurial game and become more digitally savvy, then let's get started with the Low Production, High Value Show.
Welcome to the show. Today's guest is Nicholas Thickett from Aligned. Before we get into the main discussion, Nick, can you share a little bit about what Aligned is and does?
Yeah. So it was the business that was never supposed to be a business.
I
started I started a podcast with a friend to go and try and understand why sales and marketing were misaligned. And instead of complaining about it, we started just running experiments in public. And as we kept going, we kept getting all these offers to do consulting. And that's where Aligned was born. And it all it originally was how to align your go-to-market so that you won as the world kept changing.
Well, it's interesting because that was one of the things I wanted to kick the conversation off with was what was the catalyst for the podcast? And you've just shared it. But tell us more about that transition from, I'll call it just experimentation with a friend to, the first engagement and maybe what that experience and what came as a result of the first engagement.
This is a bit funny because I never wanted to be in sales training. I had put that flag down. I said, I'm never going to do sales training. That's never going to happen. So just so you know that, we can go and work together. And so we were both working for different companies, me and Morgan, and we're like, okay, instead of teasing each other, what would actually augment each other's work? What would actually make this better? And it was funny because the deeper we got into it and the more we started testing and the more we hit on certain things, the more calls we got. Certain episodes, people were interested if they were already following, but it kind of fell flat. There every once in a while we'd hit on something and it was definitely a sore spot because you could see it get shared everywhere. And all of a sudden we'd be getting calls from directors and VPs and asking us, asking us about the experiments, what data do you have behind this? So it was super interesting because it wasn't a sales call. It was basically a demo.
Well, you spark curiosity of some sort, right? Which is the best.
And
catalyst.
The buyer's journey, a lot of it had already happened. And so they understood the need. They understood a category of solution. What they were really trying to answer was why us? Because they understood why now already. So all of the change management had been answered, but we weren't interested. So it was really funny because a lot of people actually got frustrated with us because they thought we were playing a game. I'm like, no, this is not a business. This is just a podcast. I'm fully employed. I don't want extra work. I don't want a side gig. I don't want anything else. I'm fine.
I'm not playing hard
and
to
then,
get.
Yeah. And then we had a couple enterprise companies. And the thing I found really intriguing is when they approached us, not only was the dollar figure flattering that they offered us, which almost, honestly, it would have been stupid to say no. But at the same time, too, it was the first time that we could have an impact. And I said to Morgan, I almost died wearing my burnout as a badge of honor. And part of my recovery and coming back into the business world, which I tried my hardest not to ever come back into sales. I really did. I did surveying, I did construction, everything I could to get away. And when I came back, I was like, okay, I need to answer a question because sales is truly what I love. And that is, how do you succeed in sales and not kill yourself in the process? And aligning sales and marketing and doing this in a company with the resources to make it happen was the only way. So I said, Morgan, this is the way that I'm going to go and get my vision fulfilled, my mission. I'm in. And of course, he was in too. So We've learned a lot. It's been a lot less sales training and a lot more change management and organizational design, but it's been really worth it. And I think why that's why the misalignment is there is because there's so much ego, there's so much command and control, manufacturing line specialization that is holding everything back. And for companies to do this, they think they have to admit that they were wrong. That's actually not the hard part, is that a lot of the stuff we naturally do, we now have to change, like sharing information amongst the silos. Well, that's on a need to know basis. It's really not. It's everybody in the go-to-market should know that, because then they're better for it.
Does that translate to, as you were saying, not trying to suggest to them they were wrong, but to use the name of the company, that they were misaligned. They need to be recalibrated or reconfigured because they're not set up for success. And there are impediments or challenges based on that existing or pre-existing configuration, and in some ways it gives them a bit of an out, and potentially a brighter light at the end of the tunnel kind of thing. Is that a fair assessment?
That's what I assumed, and I ended up being wrong.
In what way?
So I thought the VPs, once we got into doing this work, the VPs and C-suite would be very excited because their ROI was going to increase. So they're spending this money on headcount, technology, process, all the other things, and we improved their ROI. I assumed that they'd be excited about this change, but to them it was still a shot to their ego. And so what actually had to happen is we actually had to do such an aggressive proof of concept that it got the attention of the VPs and CXOs without us telling them. So we had to actually completely change our approach, where it wasn't the VPs and the CXOs that hired us. They weren't the ones that started this process either. It was actually managers and directors, because they saw the disconnect between the trenches and leadership. So when we started to go and work with these middle management and changing the way they looked at the teams and how they were interacting, when the communication flowed up the hill, they couldn't ignore it. And then they started asking questions. And that was the critical point that aligned everything, was that point where it was, what did you do differently? Our pipeline's been down 80% year to year, and you just generated a year's worth of pipeline in 30 days. How did we do that?
When it comes to the C-suite, when they look at the work that you're doing with I'll call it the middle layer of sales and marketing management, are they concerned at all about the impact you're having and how that might encroach upon their ego and their related performance? Is there a chance that you'll illuminate their failings?
Well, what I notice is a lot of these senior leaders, they're the ones that developed the original path. And so it worked for them. And it's a really tough environment whenever you're watching things crumble around you, or at least not perform the way you think it should, to give up control and hand it off to your team and trust them to figure it out. So what tends to happen is you start to put in more KPIs, you start to go and do more, surveillance on your team, and you want to dictate and control everything they do because that's your way of trying to make sure it works. It's a safety mechanism, it's survival. But when we took a different approach, we didn't trigger the survival mechanism because they're looking at this data, and we knew what they were tracking. So we knew what we were building for. We started with the end in mind. But when they started to see these numbers, and because a lot of C-suite and VPs, they're pattern matching, they're looking for discrepancies. When they saw this huge jump, naturally they look at what caused it. So that is how it all started, and that's what's kept us going. But a lot of the traditional stuff that I grew up in, like as a professional, I grew up doing, is not relevant today. And I'll tell you, when I switched from being a road warrior, doing my field sales, to being virtual, and I did it slightly before COVID, it was one of the most difficult transitions I've ever done because everything I learned to be true did not apply. I couldn't call the office line. befriend the EA or the secretary and network my way, get them to help me. I couldn't go to the smoke pit behind the shop and, and talk to people and do my fact gathering and, build my business case and then get introductions to, the decision maker, or even just go in myself and go in and say, hey, I know this is true. Would you like to talk? None of that worked. So it was like almost I got put on blank slate, and it was the most uncomfortable experience. So I get what these senior leaders are going through, but they've created so many different walled gardens around themselves to stay away from it, both to stay productive because of so many interruptions with, technology around us, that they are so disconnected from the trenches. And I don't think it's malicious. I think it's just a survival thing.
Mm-hmm. But does that mean, so they're disconnecting themselves or putting a motor on themselves for productivity, sanity, to, in a sense, avoid being pitched or inundated with sales pitching? But does that also translate to some degree that they're also somewhat removed from their own people?
Oh yeah, 1000%. One of the craziest things that I realized when I was benchmarking myself, actually, I created something called Mapping the Earthquake. And what I found out is that a lot of the senior leaders that I used to go for were I called it the eye of the hurricane, using all, natural disaster metaphors, I guess.
We'll go with it.
In the eye of the hurricane, nothing's wrong. Everything looks good. The world around you could be blowing up, but you have no idea because it's beautiful, it's sunny, it's great where you are.
It's quiet.
And you have no idea. And they also typically have bought or created the current solution. So the status quo, they have they have ownership of it. So they have incentive to keep it. But the earthquake, if you look at like whatever you're selling, where that impact is felt in that function, it ripples out like an earthquake does. So if you look at that main point of impact, it was very rarely the CFO, the VP of finance, chief operating officer. None of them felt it. It was in the trenches, in specific workflows, in their jobs to be done. And when I started to go and map this earthquake and found those 2 or 3 functions that my product hit on and like had a major impact on the way these people worked, and then also looked what came before and what came after, it was amazing how it opened things up. But it gave me access to people that they wanted things to change because they knew it wasn't working. And they knew that if we went to the C-suite to go and push, they would just shut it down because they had no interest. And so it's almost like I had a couple meetings where this manager was explaining the good work we had done and how we had lifted things up and how we had moved things and so on and so forth. And the VP cut him off mid-sentence and said, "You're wrong. I don't want to hear it. This is a waste of my time," and left. And I'm not saying that's how all of it is, but it is that knee-jerk, and like Daniel Kahneman and Thinking Fast and Slow, right? That's the first brain where it's that knee-jerk reaction, protection. It's that, limbic survival part. It's hard to go and tap into people's level 2 brain where it's that slow thinking, analytical, unless they trust you and find you credible. And a lot of these executives, it was the first time they had heard of us. They hadn't listened to the podcast like these managers and directors that had been listening for 6 months or 8 months. So it was like starting from ground zero. And that's actually what I met Nate Nisrael and I learned about buyer enablement and how we used to carry, everything across the finish line. We don't anymore. Deals are won when we're not in the room. So it was literally everything that I had built my career on, my little, operating system I built for myself, got flipped upside down.
So was the tipping point then, as you said, like you'll have middle managers or middle management listening to the podcast for months, and to your point, you'll have some stuff they're not interested in, then periodically you'll drop something in, and a spike in downloads, a spike in shares, whatever the signs of resonance are. But was the tipping point then when their leadership either was tasking them with pulling you in because they heard about you, or there was something that was said that resonated with them that they felt the need to share it upstairs?
So I would almost put it like an 80-20 between those. So 80% of the time, these managers were reaching out for help. Like, I listened to your episode. This really resonated with me. This is what's going on. I have no idea what to do. Do you have any episodes on this? Do you have any resources? So they were just reaching out for help. And so a lot of the time, all I was doing was sending them resources and nurturing them. And then that's what actually got passed on upstairs. And a lot of time I would do like 2-minute videos and send it and explain things and do like screen shares and demo different workflows for specific technology. That's what got shared, because then all of a sudden they were seeing a boost, but they didn't know how to implement it bigger than just a couple people. So they were bringing me in to do a bigger implementation. And when the 20% of the time that they did actually get the executives, what had happened is there had been a major trigger event. So for example, they just finished their fiscal year end. They realized that their revenue is down X amount, or they're looking forward and they're going to go and do in their next round of funding and realize that they're not going to hit the valuation they wanted because they didn't grow into their existing valuation. So now they're under the gun and they don't have a choice. And that's when I've noticed executives step up and reach out to me, is when they're under the gun and they don't have a choice, where the status quo is too expensive, it's cheaper to change. But
is that catalyst then that no matter whether it's funding related or just simply, I'll call it projections related, that there's a delta between where they're at and where they need to be revenue wise? Is that I know it sounds so simplistic, but
no, but I think you're dead on. I think I was actually talking to somebody earlier this week, and I said it's not even necessarily their concept of the future, it's where they thought they were. I think that it's a missed expectation where they thought they were doing better because people are withholding information, because there isn't a culture of safety and openness where they're not allowed to be honest. So there's a lot of companies that look at GM when they got sued for the Cobalt. Everybody's like, well, how did the CEO and how did the VPs not know this happened? It happened 12 years before. The trigger on the Cobalts, it would turn off just magically because the jingle of the keys, and it would shut off the airbags. Well, who bought these vehicles? Well, parents that buy it for young kids. So it was teenagers that were dying. So the public went on this huge uproar. The executives never heard of that before the lawsuit, because there was no incentive to pass it up the chain because it was kept in a silo. So the one team that built that ignition knew about it, but didn't tell the team that built the airbag. So they didn't know that relay killed the airbag, and they just had no idea. And I see this every day in companies where that's what happens, that trigger event of where they thought they were, something comes up that reminds them, that makes it black and white that where they thought they were is not true. And once they know, they can't ignore it. It's like the challenger customer. What's that insight that once you know, you can't unknow and you have to do something about it? And I think that's honestly all it is. But it has to be so much bigger, because when I used to go and do this with customers in the past, I would build an ROI calculation. I'd look into the kind of like the investment, why this should be prioritized, the economics for them. And I used to be somewhere between 3 and 5 times ROI that I could just do mental math and present to them and they would listen. Right now, the bare minimum is 8 to 10 times, because the fear of messing up is so strong. They'd rather keep the status quo and try to just do more activities, push harder, do the same crap that isn't working, because it's more comfortable than reaching to the unknown and getting blamed for it not working.
Are you taking them then from a situation where they have a suspicion that what got them there or to where they are isn't going to get them to where they want to be? So they have a suspicion, and then you're confirming that, or they know already, and now you're working on the change management piece to get them pointed in the right direction.
So this part has actually recently been the most interesting piece of the puzzle. And so previously, they would reach out and they would invite us in for discovery. But what has happened just in this new year is they're actually reaching out to management and directors, asking them about what's going on, and they're making recommendations, because talking about that walled garden that those executives live in for productivity. Back when we used to cold call, it was the VP and the executive or exec and the executive assistant that did the research and bought. Now, a lot of the time, it's lower down the ladder. They've done the research. They know what they want, and then they pass it up. And that's what's happened is a lot of these people have listened to the podcast. They know that the process is broken, and they have a category of solution in mind. So they recommend it, and it changes the whole conversation, because now it's not them trying to deny they have a problem, or they're not sure if it's a problem we're solving to. We know we have this problem that needs to be solved. I'm just not sure what solution's actually going to move the dial.
Well, the example you gave a moment ago about the fear having them default to the status quo. And there's a book called The Catalyst by Jean Litka, who's a professor at Darden. And she talked about the virtuous cycle and the vicious cycle. And the vicious cycle is, give me $100,000 to spend an exorbitant amount of time researching this new initiative, and I'll come back to you with the budget, business case, whatever, but it's a single bet of $100,000. Versus and that's the vicious cycle, which is we see so often, versus the virtuous cycle, which is give me $10,000 packages to go experiment, try and fail. Or basically, to sum it all up, can you give me $100,000 to fail so I avoid us spending $1 million and failing more? And like everyone's like, no. Okay, well then we're still going to lose $1 million. And it's kind of unwinding that the momentum or the embedded inertia within an organization. Not invented here. This is the way it's always been done, and this is the way I'm comped. So I'm not going to rock the boat. And I'm 2 years away from retirement. My pension's set here. I'm not rocking the boat. And
no, you're dead on. Like we go with the macro and microeconomic environment, it'll either go from a fear of missing out, where they want this full robust solution. They don't have to think about it because they know that the opportunity is there and capital's cheap. And then when we switch to the market that we're in right now, where they're not really sure of the future and capital's not cheap, now it's the fear of messing up because every dollar counts. And so what they're looking for is the opportunity to remove blame. Not necessarily remove risk, remove blame to them, so they're not under the gun if it goes wrong. And so that's what's happening with what we're doing is we're doing exactly what you said. Is you said you have $100,000. I don't want 100,000. I want 10,000. I want to validate it in the real world, and then we'll scale it for that 100,000. Wouldn't that make more sense? And it's because what you're doing is you're removing the risk and you're making it more bite-sized. Yeah. And I think that's the difference. And this is not new. Like we saw this when the oil and gas hit in 2014. We saw this when the real estate and market crashes in 2009. Like this is not new. This is normal cycles of business. But I think the biggest thing that changed is the level of complexity and option that's in the market, where it's not an easy fix anymore. It's not, oh, we just need to go and hire a sales trainer. Oh, we just need to go and get better financing rates. It could be burning something down to the ground and rebuilding it, depending on what the situation is. And they don't know. And I think that's why so many people, like I said, unless you can reduce that risk, make it small, make it easy, they just do nothing.
Well, I think in fairness to them too, I just saw a post, I think yesterday, about you've seen the MarTech slide from Chief MarTech every year of the number of technology.
Oh yeah, it's
the market.
Crazy.
So I think it was 11,000 players categorized. I mean, you can't read the thing. It's so dense, and you realize. So if I'm a VP of marketing that has to choose a solution for my tech stack, and we know a former client, I was just talking to someone there, they just ended a contract with one vendor that they were locked into for a year, and they had a list of complaints for the entire year of shortcomings, but they were locked in and just had to bite their tongue, grin and bear it, and wait for where they could give the notice. And what an awful experience! Like you're hamstrung with a bad tool that you went through the evaluation process and so on. But even to navigate these 11,000, and you're probably going to have more than one tool or more than one solution, whatever. And to your point, nobody wants to be blamed for, well, who bought this? Who do?
Yeah, how did we get here? But I think that's even one of the biggest things that got killed in sales when we started doing predictable revenue and we did the specialization in trade and basically made salespeople cogs in a system and marketers and over-indexed on short term and got rid of brand and everything else, is that we stopped implementing. So the person that made the promises wasn't there to see them fulfilled. And so one of the things I learned, because I used to own an insurance brokerage, well, if somebody canceled their insurance in the first 2 years, I had to pay back 100% of my commission. So when I used to go and do my sales process, this is off after, almost feels like therapy, but like hours of journaling trying to figure out why it happened. And what I had to look at was like, okay, why does this make sense? The economics, the business model. What is the concept of the future that I see? Do you see it as well? And what is the reality of implementation? Because if you don't realize that reality, you'll cancel. I'll be out money. You'll feel like I wasted your time and didn't meet your expectations. So there's just no point in doing anything. And I feel like with the survival and the lack of training, a lot of these companies are really lazy and haven't actually done proper positioning. They don't understand proper segmentation and haven't done win-loss. So everything is just a hypothesis. Nothing's actually hard fact. And now we're splitting up the silo. So whoever sells it, signs, doesn't deliver it. There's so many opportunities for that to just be missed. And I think that's what we're seeing shake out right now too, is this model's broken. And buyers are demanding more of us because they can't afford for someone to make promises and not keep them.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Social media has become an imperative for almost every business. Discover how to successfully implement an effective social media strategy that is supported and integrated throughout every part of your organization. With this essential book from our host, Andrew Jenkins, Social Media Marketing for Business, Scaling an Integrated Social Media Strategy Across Your Organization, is now available from Amazon or KoganPage.com.
That leads me to one of the key areas that I wanted to talk to you about was like social selling and personal branding for salespeople and or people in a sales capacity. Like I have my own business. I am the face to the business. I'm the only one who does selling for the business, but I'm not always involved in the delivery. But to your, just as you described, like I'll use your insurance example. If someone cancels after 2 years and you have to pay it all back, you then have to sort of do your own debrief on yourself to say, what of the conversations that happened 2 years previous, and I'm not sure, I don't say this to be critical of your own, but you probably were asking yourself the same question. It was like, what did I say? What did I not say? What, 2 years out caused them to unwind the results of that conversation? So I'm rambling here a bit, but now in this new era of inundated with information, we're nearly paralyzed to make a decision because there's so much choice. How do people in the sales role, as you were showing through your podcast, cause a trigger for, like, they come to you versus you having to seek them out? I mean, there's still going to be some prospecting, but we have to reverse the tables, and we have to attract buyers through insight and value add and so on. But I welcome your take on it. Right
now, the whole entire go-to-market is broken. And the biggest thing is it's like the joke of like American society.
Like such a positive.
I know, Morgan always teases me because I was trying not to ever say this. And I'm like, what I realize is where this mismatch happens, why a buyer assumes you're spam is because you're assuming they're guilty until they're proven innocent. It's backwards. We're assuming they want us. Why would they? Who cares? They don't care about you.
You don't even know
you mean nothing to them. Yes, that is an earned right, which you haven't earned. It's like walking up to someone you find attractive and saying, marry me. And it's like these social skills have been replaced by companies' need to hit numbers that mean nothing. And so it was really interesting, as you were mentioning. I had wrapped up a 2-year study, and I had pulled CRM data from 100 companies. There's in the ballpark of 4,000 to 5,000 reps that I was looking at this. And what I did is I looked at the top 2% versus the bottom 50%. And it was really interesting because the bottom 50% were doing what the company told them. They were hitting their activities for the most part, but they were pushing products. So 99% of their messaging was, I'm amazing. This product is the most amazing thing you've seen. Look at all these amazing features. You should want to buy us because we're so amazing. Book this free meeting. We won't even charge you to tell us how amazing you are. Ready to buy? But it was really interesting when I started looking at the top 2% and their tacit knowledge, that pattern recognition. They had learned on their own that didn't work because there was too much choice. So they weren't feature hunting because they couldn't easily compare. But what they were doing is they were students of their craft. And it was so hard to understand this. And it goes back to good marketing. This is why I think marketing is going to lead the charge in the next 10 years, is that student of their craft, you want to access stuff asynchronously and learn. That's why we go on YouTube. That's why we go on TikTok. What we used to do was go out and have a beer with our friends, our coworkers in the bullpen. And instead of complain about our day, you'd be voicing your concern because you didn't understand why it happened. And you wanted to figure out what the problem really was so you could fix it. That is the student of your craft. You're in learning mode. And so what sellers were doing is 80% of their messaging was actually learning and development catered to that point in their professional career. The next one was passion. And you could call this a couple different ways, but 15% of what they were sending was passion driven, and they were nerding out on a shared interest. Because what they found is there was trust through association. So if I knew that you like lambics and you think that, North American market has no business trying to go and brew them, we can nerd out on that. And because you feel like I'm knowledgeable and confident and you can trust me, even though I've never talked about what I sell, you will give me an at-bat before anyone else. And then the thing that blew me away for the last 5% was pain-based messaging. So it was building on that business case. Here's what I saw. This is why it matters. Interested? But only if it was trigger-based. So what they did is they never sent any outreach unless there was a trigger in the market. And what they sat down with CS, product, marketing, and they started to go and rack their brains to extract this intelligence of all their trial and error. And they're like, okay, so these last big 5 that we won, even though they're not necessarily all the same, what attributes or identifiers are exactly the same? What do they all share in common? What were the ones that we won more than 50% of the time, more than 80% of the time? What are the ones we never win? What do they have in common? Is it a certain persona that we're involving? And they deconstructed the entire buyer's journey and recreated their lists and prioritization filters. It was amazing. And most of them had about 8 to 20 filters that they were using to signal now. Now is the time to change, because what they don't know is they're turning around this corner. Once they get around the corner, the road is broken and they're going to fall in a pit and it's going to be a major disaster. So, it's worth us going and interrupting them right now because we can actually save them. And that was only 5%. So their volume was significantly lower. And what were they doing instead? Well, they realized going one-to-one to educate took too long. And they're like, I can't trust my marketing department because they're putting out product bullshit that I know my customers don't want to hear. So I'm going to become a marketer. And so all of these really great top 2% of sellers started taking copywriting courses, started taking social media courses, and they started to take what they learned back in the days of, in-person networking, what it meant to be a good networker. And, I'm sure you'll ask me later what social selling is. Most people are wrong. They don't social sell. And that's okay.
They social spam.
Yeah. It was just really interesting seeing how these top sellers being so driven, knowing their numbers, seeing that what they were doing wasn't giving them the same return on effort. So they were running experiments, small experiments to see what was getting, oh, this one worked better, just like what we do with ads, just like what we do with copy. But they did it themselves, and they started empowering themselves. They were even buying their own tech, just because that process was so tedious and took so much time that they could automate research or automate the copywriting, certain aspects that they could then focus on the human aspects. And they were consistently winning when everybody else was losing. So other interesting thing, these bottom 50%, right now we're only activating maybe 1 in 30 accounts. So of the 30 accounts that they're actively prospecting, they only get 1 just to an opportunity. And they're not even necessarily winning it. These top sellers are 1 in 4 or 1 in 5. The numbers were just so unbelievably different. And these top sellers tended to work less hours.
Well, is it a matter, the bottom 50, to your point, are interrupting because they're just scattershot with the 30 in hopes of capturing the 1, where the top 2% are focusing on fewer. The emphasis is more on nurture and educate versus spamming and just dumping marketing speak. And to your point, they're not interrupting until they know it's safe to. Or it doesn't even feel like an interruption because there's, the cosmic tumblers have aligned that the need has been, there's a trigger for the need, or there's a indirect expression of the need, and I'm showing up. I've already educated them to some degree, and they already have some implied trust in me as an expert because of all the extra effort that I've done to that point.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. They were more patient, and they realized when they did their win-loss that the knowledge and confidence that their champion had in-house was what determined how often they won. And they also looked at where their product missed. This is one of the more interesting things that came out of it too, is they were very clear on who they served and who they served well. And so they actually compared the difference between the people that buy versus the people that keep scaling their product. Why do they keep coming back? Why is it that they became power users when the same company that looks almost identical didn't? And they started to get really granular on those differences. And I think that's the biggest difference between the bottom 50% and the top 2 is the 2 are actually being strategic because they knew how to play and they knew specifically how to win. And so they were looking for things where if you look at the bottom 50% and most marketing generated lists, they're TAM filters. Oh, I got the right head count, I got the right revenue and the right vertical and the right, and it's and so you have a heartbeat and, you might have some cash flow, so you should want to buy from us. And these top sellers, when they did this analysis, went so much deeper and said, actually how you guys set up your product marketing or product management, it's actually more run on a line of business. And I know that you own the P&L. And so right now, for you to go and have a certain ROI will determine if you have to be stuck in innovate or stuck in efficiency, or if you're allowed to innovate. Because if you're stuck in efficiency, you got to go around with that tin can begging everybody for money around the way. Well, we both know that this is a lose-lose. I can help. This is something we've worked with many different customers. I know you know so-and-so. Could I see if it makes sense for you? And because they were so targeted and they knew those jobs to be done and the specific pains and how they were actually felt, that it resonated. And the thing too is they knew the triggers, but they also knew what they thought they were buying versus what they actually talked about what they got. The actual impact, not the feature. And because it's natural, it's human, that's how we talk. We don't talk about buying a hammer to go and hit a nail. We talk about hanging a picture, the activity.
The outcome.
And when it's just amazing how efficient they are and how dialed in when they're looking. They're like, no, this one doesn't make sense. But because it's also what a founder gets when they start, is they have this tacit knowledge, this pattern recognition of running all these experiments that never get shared. And as we build out these silos, intelligence gets held within these groups and never shared because it's on a need-to-know basis. So there's millions in dollars of R&D being done on a regular basis and never shared. So why are we spending money on R&D when we're not even using the existing R&D that we're doing right now and sharing it amongst our groups? And that's why when you align your go-to-market and you have product talking to marketing, talking to sales, talking to service, it just changes the whole thing because people see different things in their job. And if we knew, it would completely change everything.
Well, I think you highlighted something there about the top 2% and the specificity by which they targeted, or the specificity of their messaging. I'm assuming to the recipient didn't feel like an interruption. It probably felt like a bit of a relief, like, oh my God, they get me. And it sounds like they can be of help because they actually have laid out in quite clear explanation that they understand my problem, or they've illuminated to something that I hadn't articulated before, but now once they kind of reflected back on me, go, yeah, that is an issue that I could use some help with.
Yeah, and they close fast because the problem's immediate. The one thing, too, that was amazing is how easily they would walk away if things didn't align. Like if their criteria, if they were wrong on a hypothesis, they'd walk away. And I asked one of the top sellers, and he does like 150 to 180 million in sales just by himself. And I'm like, how in the hell do you do this so consistently? And he's like, know when to walk away so you don't burn a bridge, because I can't build bridges faster than I can destroy them. So it's easier to keep that bridge and walk away and come back when the time is right than push just for the sake of pushing. And I just thought it was such brilliant, and it just has stuck with me. You're like, yeah, you got to be ruthless on qualification, not because of you, but because of them. And if you burn your reputation in the market, that trust and credibility, going back to what you were saying about branding for founders, like I think of Will Allred. He's the king of email. They're a small company, Lavender. Mm-hmm. Lavender at AI is they're small. They're growing like crazy because they have so much earned trust and credibility, so much brand reputation that goodwill is already baked in. So because they've invested so much into you with you never asking anything, it makes it so easy to say yes.
It's very hard to tell a company you should give as much away as possible. And, Lavender is a perfect example. I've seen Will on a bazillion YouTubes and podcasts and whatever. Well, especially YouTube, because he can show you in real time culling down an email from bloat to 3 lines of just on the money.
Yep.
But all that cost him was his time. Some might say, well, he's given away the secret sauce. You go, no, because Lavender, what he did in the 45 minutes talking, Lavender will do for you in a matter of seconds while you're inside Gmail. So he's just articulated what his solution does for you in an automated way, and it's a gift.
It's a gift. It's also market intelligence. It's also competitive intelligence that's baked in. You're learning about your market and how they show up versus how you need to show up. He's running constant experiments, whether he goes and announces it to everyone, like he's always testing the market. And I think that's the thing that's getting missed is these micro tests, like what you had brought up earlier. You're removing the risk by doing little things, not doing the typical waterfall, dropping everything on it, running this major campaign going, maybe we should have done some market research before we started to make sure that we were learning in the process.
Well, and like if using Lavender as an example, like, okay, they've got 2 million emails. I don't know what the regular time frame is if it's monthly, but still, that's 2 million emails that I've never sent before in my lifetime of insights to say it's a 2-word subject line in lowercase. It's 3 lines separated, so it's just bullet point 1 or item number 1, and they're laying out the cadence. This has to be read in 11 seconds, grade 5 level, bang, bang, bang. Okay, you did all the heavy lifting to get me there. Thank God.
Yeah, and it makes it so easy to say yes, but it even goes back to the point we were talking about earlier of the intelligence is missing with the operations. They're not attached because Lavender plugs into a lot of the sequencers. Well, why this is important is most sellers write their own sequences or they'll get enablement or marketing to do it, but they never share the results of that trial and error and how they're modifying it as they go and what personas they're targeting. Well, Lavender does that within your team, takes those sequences, builds out the best practices from you, and then shares it indirectly through their scoring system.
Well,
But it's that intel, right? Once you know,
and it's the
but
iteration we
if
talked about earlier. Okay, that first pass of the whole cadence cycle, there was a failure points here, here, and here. Let's recalibrate so the next cycle or the next batch of to go through that same cadence, we've tweaked it and just keep learning. I'm thoroughly impressed by them. I come from a software background, and it's night and day how we used to market 20 some years ago versus now. I want to, just conscious of time, when you think of the 2% and their approach and the specificity of, so they're going quality over quantity and they're willing to walk away. When you think from that, kind of picking up there, how do you define social selling with that kind of mindset or perspective or approach?
Love it. Great question. Social selling is engagement in public that earns conversations in private. When you went networking, the person that handed out business cards to everyone, did you call them a networker? Probably not. The person that stood up on the top of the stage and delivered a keynote, did you call them a networker?
No.
No, they were a public speaker, or in this case, maybe content marketing. Definitely serves. It's all part of the picture. But the person that's asking the questions, going around introducing people, that glue that holds all of the other stuff together, that's who we call the networker. Social selling is just networking on digital. Doesn't matter what platform you're on, but it's all we're doing is engaging out in public so people could hear us, get to know us, get an essence of who we are, that trust and credibility at scale, because attention now is earned.
Yeah.
And if I don't trust and find you credible, anything you're going to tell me is useless in my mind, and I'm not open to it. My brain is turned off to it. And I think this is the biggest change, because previously we leaned on our companies for retirement. We leaned on our companies to go and onboard us and mentor us. When I started, I almost worked on an apprenticeship. That doesn't exist anymore. So people are looking for their own education. That's why Substack has become so big, because a lot of the algorithms aren't even serving the information people want, because they've opted into those certain individuals they trust. This is what's happened. We went from really big to really small, and it's not even necessarily brands. It's individuals that we trust, that face, that person we know. And so this is really why social selling, I think, has got so big, is we can now talk to our peers. We can now get that proof of concept long before we ever touch it. So that fear of messing up doesn't exist.
Well, and in our own work, we talked to a lot of clients about mobilizing their employees to be sharing content and acting as ambassadors, because I said, no disrespect to your brand, your employees have richer relationships than you will ever have as a brand. And even those who are specific to sales, it's their trusted relationships that are serving your objectives as a business. And so if they're out there building trust on your behalf, great. You have to deliver as a brand so as not to take away from the trust that they've built, but it's still, they are the conduit for that trust. And I have a friend in the car business who gave a great example. He's in digital marketing for a group of dealers. He said, nobody goes to the proverbial or cliche dinner party example. He said, nobody goes to a dinner party and walks up to someone and says, psst, guess what? We've got some great lease rates this month for X, Y. He's like, you've just met them. Like, where did you see the necessity to start that kind of conversation versus just the example I like to give is from John Ferrara from Nimble CRM, who said, when you teach someone to fish, eventually they figure out that you sell fishing poles. And I think that's puts it very succinctly.
Yeah.
Before I want to respect your time. We'll wrap it up with this one last question or a piece of advice from you. Many of the people that listen to this particular show are entrepreneurs or entrepreneurial within an organization, and they, just as you laid out just a moment ago, the need now for a personal brand, whether you're an entrepreneur or an employee, because the loyalty of an employer to a person is not the same as it used to be. My father had a 30-plus year career at Bell Canada. I was there for 3 years. A 30-year career in any one company just doesn't exist anymore. So just as you highlighted earlier, we are on our own to make our way. And so from an entrepreneur or entrepreneurial type person trying to build a personal brand and adopt some social selling methodologies, what words of advice would you leave us with?
Lean into your experiences of life. And what a lot of people shy away from when they first start with anything is they're worried about saying the wrong thing. But one thing I've seen happen more often than not is people try to be perfect. And perfect is not interesting. What is interesting, and this goes back to what you were saying earlier about the individuals being ambassadors, individuals have emotion. They're not perfect. They learned. They went through the journey that these people are going through. And so the moment that you lean in on those hard lessons you've learned in life and start really appreciating the journey that you've been on, and that makes you uniquely qualified to serve a certain market or serve a certain process, lean into that calling, find where you're naturally interested, the things that you want to nerd out on after work or the things you never get bored of, find that. And then make sure not to build a brand. Don't even actually worry about brand. Worry about how do you get in front of those people that need you most. And how can you keep consistently showing up for them so that anytime they need you or anytime someone needs something you help them with, that they know where to send them. And if you keep doing that consistently and not worried about trying to do promotions, trying to go and sell things, and just stay consistent, it will not take long because it is so uncommon. You will stand out and get recognized within the first 30 days. But it is a commitment. It's not 5 minutes a day. It's probably realistically about a half an hour to an hour a day. Every single day, show up. And don't embrace your don't worry about making mistakes. That's why people buy into you.
Well, I think that's fantastic because I think you raise an interesting point about like the brand. In some ways, the brand will come. It's that's not the objective. It is in some ways, but it's not the goal. Or you're not acting from the brand as the impetus. You're acting from the goal of being helpful and being human while you do it. And then the brand. So that, as you said, people, when they think about a particular thing that they need to resolve, or they need someone has come to them and said, I need help with X, you are top of mind because you have been helpful.
Absolutely. And how many times does your brand change when what is that saying, that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face, Mike Tyson? And I think this is why this is such a natural way to do it too, is going back to lower risk. Go out in the wild. Test your wild theories, have fun, make it a game, enjoy yourself. Take a couple punches in the process. You're bound to not, everybody's not going to love you, but never shy away from what you learn. Write it down, have a journal. It's still one of my favorite activities, a daily journal. Talk about what happened and understand why. And if you do that consistently, like I said, keep showing up, then the brand is easy to put together. And I'm sure you have lots of customers that are like this. You're trying to put a brand together and they have no clue because they haven't done this hard trial and error. So a lot of the answers are still left open.
Well, and we often describe social as the pointy end of the spear, meaning there's so much that had to come before it. So even from a personal brand point of view, how I see myself came long before LinkedIn. So that's just, I'll call it the visual manifestation. There's a lot more foundational stuff that has to occur first. So in some ways, it comes back to your values. And as you laid out, my values might be about being helpful, paying it forward, sharing first, and not leading with what do I stand to gain here? But again, that becomes long before whether I tweeted or whether I DM'd or whatever on LinkedIn. And sometimes I think in all the noise and chatter, we can potentially lose track of that. So,
Couldn't agree more. Well said.
well, thank you. Listen, it's fantastic. We ran over time, which was unexpected, but I want to thank you for your time and everything that you shared. Just tremendous value, and to bring to bear the insights from your study. And I mean, I'm somewhat jealous because your data set is only going to keep getting bigger, and the insights to be derived from that only become more robust. But thank you again.
Thank you for inviting me on this journey, giving me a platform to share what I've learned, and nerding out with me on one of my favorite topics. This is one of my favorite things to do, so thank you so much. We will definitely have to do this again.
We will.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Low Production High Value Show. Be sure to give us a rating and subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Don't forget to check out Volterra at volterradigital.com to learn more about how they can support your social media marketing.